Based on the information in your analysis, did you come to a conclusion about what Tai Chan's likely blood alcohol concentration could be at the time of the shooting that night?
Yes.
And can you tell us what that was?
The estimated value was 0.24 gram percent, and then I did calculate a range around that value based on some discrepancies in information. The low end of the range was 0.21 gram percent, and the high end of the range was 0.27 gram percent at the time of the shooting.
Okay, and your estimation was based on the information that Mr. Chan had a body weight of between 100...
Some counsel is testifying.
It's a question, Judge.
Again, you can lead an expert witness overruling the objection. Go ahead.
Dr. Martinsky, as I was saying, the estimation that you provided was based on information that Tai Chan had a body weight of between 100 and 185 pounds with a height of 5 feet 10 inches, correct?
That's the information I used for my calculations.
Okay. All right. And the information that you had was that based on the alcoholic beverage consumption and food consumption, based on the witnesses and reports and so on, starting at 5 p.m. that night, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And again, you said you have accounted for variance in possible outcomes given that the food and the alcohol could have been shared by people at the tables and so on. So is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, one thing that you found to be critically important in this case is the inclusion or the fact that there were some of these Red Bull energy drinks consumed. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you tell us what that means in connection or in conjunction with someone consuming alcohol? Because that's your area, right? That's your field.
That's my area of expertise.
And so tell us what that means when you have a mixture of those beverages, when you have people consuming the energy drinks and the alcohol.
So the first thing that's important is that when people are drinking, they make estimates about their impairment and level of intoxication. And when people consume energy drinks with alcohol, I've shown this in a variety of different laboratory studies that I've conducted, individuals tend to be less accurate in assessing their level of intoxication. They think they're less intoxicated than they actually are. Importantly, energy drinks, even though you feel less intoxicated, you're not any less intoxicated. If you look at a breathalyzer reading, their breath alcohol level is the same, whether they mix the energy drinks with the alcohol or the alcohol is by itself. And then their cognitive abilities are impaired similarly when alcohol is used or alcohol is mixed with the energy drink. So it's a subjective change where you are not accurately perceiving how much alcohol you really have had or how impaired you really are. The second thing that we've shown in our variety of our laboratory studies is that when people mix energy drinks with alcohol, they drink a lot more alcohol. When you start drinking alcohol, alcohol is very rewarding, and that's the reaction of the brain to the drug. But when you mix in the energy drink, you want to drink much more. You want to drink longer. In a variety of different lab studies, we've shown that you actually drink faster. So all of those factors combined lead people to drink much more alcohol than they would if they had just consumed alcohol by itself. And then the third thing we found in our laboratory studies is that the stimulant properties of the energy drink seem to antagonize some of the impairment that you see on fine motor control and gross motor control. So when you drink alcohol by itself, your reaction times get slower, your ability to maintain your balance, have good motor coordination. All of those abilities are impaired by alcohol. But what we've seen in various laboratory studies is that the energy drink can make you seem less impaired on those motor tasks. So your reaction times are faster, you don't look as impaired when you're walking, your ability to balance looks more closer to a sober state when you mix in the energy drink with the alcohol versus alcohol by itself.
When you talk about the motor skills, what are those are some examples? The walking, the ability to just perform physical tasks?
So in our lab, we've looked at a variety of different things. We've looked at simple things like just being able to press a button on a computer keyboard. That's like a simple reaction time. And you can see that alcohol slows down your reaction time. If you give an energy drink with the alcohol, the reaction time looks closer to sober. We look at balance and coordination. We have a variety of pieces of equipment that are automatically detecting body sway. When you drink alcohol, you tend to not be able to stand very still. You tend to sway a lot, and you can see that on these machines. They'll detect that. When you give the energy drink, they don't sway as much. They look closer to sober. And then we've also looked at the components of field sobriety testing that police officers use, like walking a straight line, standing on one foot. We've even looked at things like the visual nystagmus, the jerking of the eye, when a police officer holds a flashlight in front of a person and moves it off to the side. They're looking for the nystagmus of the eye. You see that nystagmus with the alcohol by itself, the energy drink antagonizes it. So anything that has any sort of motor component, you see less impairment when the energy drink is used.
Well, what is that?
Excuse me, Doctor. Please let me encourage you to slow down a little bit. There are parts of it that you really speak on.
Sorry.
So please be sensitive that our court reporter has to stay up with you.
Yes.
And it has been a very long day for
Yes, I apologize, Your Honor.
Please slow it down just a little bit. Go ahead, Mr. Day.
Thank you. Dr. Marchinsky, what is it the caffeine in the energy drink, or what is it that makes the difference?
It is largely the caffeine. So we've done the same studies with caffeine and saw the same results, but it is more pronounced with the energy drink, and there are other stimulant ingredients in energy drinks. Energy drinks are proprietary products, so it's difficult for scientists who are not involved with the companies to get an exact detailed analysis of what goes into energy drinks. And we know from talking to bartenders that, a lot of bartenders will serve Red Bull with alcohol, but then other bartenders, there's a lot of Monster, so those are different sort of similar pattern of ingredients probably that go into those products, but I would guess probably the caffeine is a large component.
So, am I right in saying your testimony is that these people who are consuming the alcohol plus the energy, plus the Red Bull, for example, what you found is that those people report feeling less intoxicated after consuming those drinks, even though they still have they could have those high levels of intoxication? Yes,
that's correct.
Dr. Marchinsky, are you familiar with the concept of lower brain versus higher brain? Maybe I'm making it too simplistic, but is that a concept that you're familiar with?
Yes, there's various regions of the brain that have various responsibilities in the behaviors that you see. Do you want me to elaborate?
Well, let me ask you this. So lower brain function, what's the difference? I mean, higher brain, are we talking about different parts of the brain that control different aspects of our behavior? Or?
Right. So your brain in your head is like a globe, and different parts of the brain are responsible for different things. So at the top part of your brain, that's, if you think where your forehead is, the prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex, those areas of the brain are really important for complex things that humans do, like planning, organization, thinking about the consequences of actions, maintaining impulse control, those sorts of things. Sometimes that part of the brain is simply just called like a stop system, where you stop, weigh in, think about, the actions, things like that. Lower down in the brain, if you think about where your ears are and you move inward, that's your limbic system. That is the system that is involved in getting you to eat, or responding to threats, or any of those sort of simple behaviors. It's not as complex, it's not as flexible, because it just responds. And so each part of the brain in an ideal situation is coordinated. So, for example, if you see a piece of chocolate cake, the lower part of your brain says, that looks really good, I think I'll go eat it. So it's often called the go system. And the top part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, will weigh in and say, yes, I would really like that piece of chocolate cake, but maybe I should eat my dinner first and then I'll have dessert. So the weighing in, the stop system's at the top, the go system is kind of in the bottom near your ear level towards the center.
And what is the effect if someone is intoxicated or consuming energy drinks and alcohol to the extent that you've seen in a case, like based on the facts that you were provided in this case? Does the combination of the energy drink and the alcohol have an effect on either the lower or the higher brain or lower brain, or what would the effect be, if any?
Well, alcohol by itself, when you start drinking, it will affect the front part of the brain first, and then it moves backwards if the dose of alcohol continues to increase. So a lot of times early in drinking, the first thing that people will notice, even within a drink or two, is the front part of their brain that tells them, you really shouldn't say that person is wearing an ugly dress. That part of the brain stops working, so you actually blurt it out. So that part of the brain is affected first. And if you continue to keep drinking, then portions of the brain below that region will get affected. Alcohol is a sedative drug, and you're probably aware of the fact that if you drink tremendous amounts of alcohol, eventually your whole brain will stop working and you will stop breathing. And those breathing centers are actually at the top of your spinal cord, at the very low portions of your brain.
Doctor, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
And then when you mix energy drinks in, there are a lot of different areas of the brain that will respond to the stimulant drug. It's not as well understood scientifically what areas of the brain caffeine or energy drinks are affecting, but it does appear, based on the findings with the motor control, that the very low areas of the brain are more activated. So at the very bottom of your brain, there's actually a separated structure that looks a bit like a cauliflower at the bottom of your brain, and that's where a lot of your motor control functioning is located, and that seems to be part of the area where you have a lot of the effect of the energy drinks.
Is it conceivable, though, is it possible that someone whose higher brain or upper brain was affected by the alcohol and the energy drinks, that you could still perform functions, the lower brain wouldn't be affected, you'd still be able to do things instinctively or based on training or whatever it is, even if you've consumed large amounts of energy drinks and alcohol?
Right. So if the alcohol is affecting the front of the brain downwards, you will have lower level functions that might still be fully intact or partially functioning, depending on how much alcohol has been consumed and then how much maybe the caffeine or the energy drink is helping some of those functions.
And so does that relate to what you were saying about the ability to perform those motor skills as if they weren't necessarily affected by the alcohol? In other words, you'd still be able to do things that without the energy drink you might not be able to do as well.
That's correct, and that's supported by studies that I've done in my lab.
Okay, and based on your experience, based on your studies, based on the work that you do, you sat through testimony here about the facts, and you've heard testimony, you've reviewed reports and things. Is it possible that someone who has consumed, it could be at the level of intoxication that you found Tai Chan was at, could that person act physically and successfully to defend themselves against a perceived threat?
Well, threat detection is a lower level function, so yes.
So threat detection is, when you say lower level, you mean the lower part of the brain that you were talking about, the go part, for example, is that right?
Right.
And tell us more about that. Why is that's the case? I mean, is that sort of...
Well, if you have lower level brain functions, those are for survival functions. And so survival functions can be things as simple as eating when you're hungry, or it can be survival functions as trying to stay, intact if someone's attacking you. Higher order functions require you to weigh in on what the lower level is saying.
But it's your opinion then that someone who is perceiving a threat to their safety or life could react based on the lower level functions because that's a survival area, survival instinct kicking in from the lower part of the brain.
Yes.
All right, we have a moment.
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Wojcinski, based on what you were just talking to me about, so the frontal part of the brain, the frontal lobes, or the higher brain, that could be affected. That's the area where we make plans and preparations and deliberations and things like that. Is that right?
Yes.
And so that would be affected, in your opinion, by someone who is at the range of 0.24 blood alcohol concentration, right?
0.24 is extremely high intoxication. If he had, in this case, if he had not consumed the energy drinks, I would have expected to have him be passed out. It's 3 times the legal limit. So certainly any planning, organization functions, those prefrontal cortex functions, you would not anticipate that any of that activity would be occurring.
So someone at that level of intoxication, as you've described, 0.24, they're not functioning to make plans and make preparations and deliberate on things. Is that right? Is that affected by it?
No. Their judgment is grossly impaired.
And that would include planning and preparating and deliberating a first-degree murder, in your view?
Objection.
Sustained.
John, will you approach?
Yes, go ahead. All right, go ahead and proceed, Mr. Day, again with the restrictions and guidelines that the court is giving.
Thank you. Dr. Marchinsky, let me ask you a few more questions. You testified that you've told us about the effects of alcohol and the energy drinks, but alcohol in particular on the higher brain or the frontal lobe area, right?
Yes.
And that's, as you said, that's where our decision-making ability resides. Is that
Yes.
accurate? And that's the only place in the brain where that decision-making ability is centered, right? That's where it comes from. Is that right?
Well, there's different kinds of decisions, but most of the decisions that we think about making decisions, yes, they're located in the frontal areas.
Okay. And the effect of alcohol on that, on those lobes, on the higher brain is what?
It just prevents them from acting effectively.
And can you give us some examples of high level of intoxication? What are some common examples of behavioral effects of alcohol on the decision-making processes and the deliberative processes at that level of intoxication?
At this level of intoxication?
Yes.
This is grossly intoxicated, so the individual probably could not make any, reasonable decisions, certainly couldn't plan a course of action. I would expect this person to be practically passing out at this, if it was, straight alcohol at this level.
Okay, and so people, not specific to anyone in particular, but people who have that level of intoxication, they're not good at planning anything, right?
No, they should be in the hospital.
Okay, they're not good at making reasonable, reasoned, deliberative decisions in any way, right?
Right.
And if I pose to you the question of if the crime of first-degree murder required deliberation and planning and intent, what would you say, how would you apply that to someone at that level of intoxication? Could they do those things?
Well, if you can't formulate any plan of action, then I can't see how it fits that it would be first degree.
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead. Anything else, Mr. Day?
No, you're going to pass the witness, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fires, cross-examination, Dr. Marchinsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Excuse me. You just said that if you can't formulate any plan of action, you don't know how you can get to first degree. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Are you how familiar are you with the different degrees of homicide in the state of New Mexico?
I am not.
You've never testified in New Mexico before, have you?
No, I have not.
Can you point out the defendant in the courtroom?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance. It's not.
Sustained.
It's very relevant, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
Once again, I've ruled, I've sustained the objection. Go on to the next question. I believe there's already been testimony that has addressed the extent of the doctor's involvement.
Doctor, your CV, your resume is 18 pages long, is that right?
That would be correct.
And your report that you wrote in this case is 2 1/8 pages long, is that right?
That's what I was requested to do.
Okay. You were requested to do that. Now, when you were requested to do this report, you didn't speak to the defendant, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't meet him in person, did you?
No, I did not.
You never talked to him on the phone, did
Objection,
you?
Your Honor. I mean, I don't know how far you need to go, Mr. Myers. There's been no contact between this witness and the defendant. That's very thorough. So go on to the line of question.
So as far as your review of the matters before this jury, you haven't been in this courtroom for all of the days so far that this trial has been underway, have you?
No.
Okay. Matter of fact, you only reviewed 9 items in preparation of this report, is that correct?
That's correct.
And on those 9 items, 2 of them are the autopsy report for the victim, Jeremy Martin, and the toxicology report for the victim, Jeremy Martin. Is that right?
That's correct.
So items 3 and 4 are on your report, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, those 2 items have absolutely nothing to do with the intoxication level of defendant Tai Chan, do they?
No, that's not correct. When you have incomplete information, such as food consumption, there's a variability in the reduction in the peak blood alcohol concentration that can occur for food. And since they shared food and you had an autopsy number of blood alcohol concentration, that allowed me to generate a value as part of the equation that I used for the reduction of BAC based on food intake.
But there's a problem with your analysis, isn't there? You don't know how much food was consumed, do you? I'm asking a question, Your Honor.
Allow some flexibility. I'm overruling the objection. But again, it's the form and the tone. Please restate the question.
Were you at any of the eating establishments on the night that Jeremy Martin was murdered?
No.
Okay. You have no idea how much food Tai Chan consumed, do you?
No.
So going back to my original question, the autopsy and toxicology report associated with Jeremy Martin does not provide you quality information that accurately informs your report, does it?
Objection or abstinence?
The autopsy report and the toxicology report of Jeremy Martin does not accurately provide information to you so that you might provide an accurate report, does it?
I think I answered the question because I have receipts on every place they went from 5 p.m. on. There was indication of food intake at the Hooters establishment, and the toxicology report for Jeremy Martin allows me to calculate in a reduction in blood alcohol concentration based on that food intake that I could apply to both individuals.
Based on the food intake from
the receipt from Hooters, where they each ordered a order of wings and they shared fries.
You don't have any information about what foods or how much they consumed before they arrived at any of these eating establishments, do you?
No, that's correct.
You also received this information about the defendant's body weight being approximately 180 to 185 pounds from a third party, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct.
And that third party was an employee of the defense attorneys, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as far as the testimony of Nicole Janes is concerned, you were here in the courtroom for that today, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And that testimony indicated that she saw Jeremy Martin stopped consuming alcohol and switched to water. Is that right?
After she said that he consumed 1 Red Bull vodka, then he switched to water. That's my recollection of her statements.
And what did she say about the defendant's consumption of alcohol? Did it stop or did it continue?
It continued.
Now, the materials that you reviewed said that you received an Excel spreadsheet detailing alcoholic beverages and food consumption, but it also it did not contain the statement of Mr. Marvin Zamora. Is that correct?
I do not have a statement from anyone named Zamora.
Do you even know who he was?
No, I do not.
Would it surprise you to know that he was an eyewitness to the shooting and could attest to the conduct of the defendant?
I think I just testified that individuals who consume a lot of energy drinks with alcohol look relatively sober if you're looking at them visually.
Let's get specific. DWI, you estimated that before we get there, let's take our time. You said this blood alcohol concentration that you arrived at for defendant Chan is 0.24, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what was the basis of your arrival at that 0.24 amount?
You want to know exactly what he consumed that night?
I'm sorry?
You want me to report from the receipts all the alcohol he consumed?
No, I want you to describe for the jury how it is that you can arrive at a 0.24 blood alcohol content just based upon receipts. How do you do the reduction to get to that amount?
Oh, okay. So once you have the person's estimated body weight, you take the drinks that they are consuming at various portions in time and you look at how much the blood alcohol concentration rises based on a standard updated Widmark equation. And that at each time point when another drink is consumed or another several drinks are consumed, you continue to add to the value. And then throughout time, you reduce the blood alcohol concentration based on a standard metabolism rate of 0.015 per hour. So it's pretty standard to use the Widmark equation to come to a blood alcohol concentration.
Okay. And that's based upon the information that you had made available to you, and essentially that's your report, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there are some other factors that could affect that calculation. Is that correct? For
Want to
example,
go into specifics?
if the defendant's body weight were something other than what had been provided to you, would that throw your equation off?
Yes, but I guess we want to know off how much. Like with any scientific estimate of value, there's a range usually. With scientific certainty, there's a range around that. So, if I have an estimate of 180 and he was 170, that won't affect the calculation very much. If the estimated calculation was from 180 and he was actually 140, it may alter the calculation to a greater degree, or to the other end of the spectrum.
But you don't know, other than the information that you were provided, what his exact body weight was that evening, correct?
That's correct.
Now, do you know what the defendant's body fat index was?
No, I do not.
And would a difference in body fat index have an effect on your calculations?
It can affect the metabolism rate. Lower body fat can reduce the metabolism rate. Most of the time is when I apply these calculations in my lab. Most of the college students that I test tend to have reasonably low body weights. We have a weight restriction, so the equation works relatively well for people who are of reasonable body size, body weight. It does not work quite as well for obese individuals, for example.
And that's your study, at your office at your university. That's a pretty controlled environment, right?
Yes, it is a controlled environment.
And this is real life.
That's right.
Now, do you know what the ratio of the energy drink consumed to the alcoholic beverage that it was mixed with was?
Well, based on the receipts, you can tell, for example, a bomb drink is usually a whole, so they consumed a Jaeger bomb. Usually you take a Red Bull can, pour it into a glass, drop a shot into it. So that's 4 parts energy drink or 5 parts energy drink to the shot. So usually you're looking at a minimum of 3 parts energy drink to the alcohol and then going upwards to 4 or 5 parts energy drink to the alcohol.
And that's a presumption on your part, is that correct?
Well, most bartenders serve drinks in relatively similar manners, but there is variability, of course.
There can be variability?
Yes.
For example, you don't know what the size of the shot glass was.
Well, usually most bars serve the standard shot because they're trying to, they don't want to pour heavy They usually, and consumers are not happy if you pour light.
But
So,
doctor, that's a presumption on your part, isn't it?
Yes.
You weren't there.
no.
What is an excretion rate?
That's the standard metabolism rate.
Excretion of what?
You're metabolizing alcohol out of your system.
Okay. There are other things that can be excreted through the body process, right? And I don't mean that in the gross sense. I just mean like salts and other things that
Oh, sure.
sweat it out.
Yes.
Do you know what Defendant Chan's physical conditioning was?
No, I never examined the defendant.
So you don't know what his lung function was?
No.
Never hooked him up to a treadmill and had a PO2 reading?
Objection, this is ridiculous. The court does consider it somewhat excessive, but I'm giving you some latitude. I mean, the issue is raised. If there's different components that affect the testimony, you can ask those questions. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. You don't know what his lung function was, right?
No.
Okay. You don't know how efficient they were?
No.
Don't know if he suffered from any type of asthmatic conditions or bronchial obstructions or anything like that, correct?
No, I didn't examine the defendant.
Okay. What about the defendant's kidneys and the function of them?
I think you're kind of a response. Don't carry it that far. She didn't give any examination to the defendant.
That's correct, Your Honor, but if it pleases the court, we'd like the opportunity to be able to examine this witness completely and fully. She has been offered the opportunity to go into...
Mr. Byers, when I talk to you, you stop talking. I'm giving you direction. You have become repetitive. I believe the testimony has already been clear that there was no examination done. So this witness does not know the bodily functions of the defendant. That's very clear. And you make that point very clear. So go on to another line.
Do you know what the size of the pitcher that the beer was served in, what that size was?
From Hooters, I went on their website and used their information from their website.
Do you know what the size of the pitcher was that was served that evening?
No.
At any of the establishments?
No, some of the drinks were standard drinks, but there was consumption from one pitcher. So.
Doctor, you mentioned the pitcher at Hooters. Do you know whether it was completely consumed?
Well, at Hooters, there was one pitcher on the receipt, and then there was a statement by the waitress at Hooters that she thought they consumed another pitcher, but left some of it in it. When I was doing my calculations, given that the second pitcher was not on the actual receipt, I thought it was probably best to assume that potentially was a memory error on her part. I did do calculations including a quarter pitcher, but then also calculations which are not including.
Doctor, why would you presume it's a memory error?
Well, a lot of times establishments are very concerned about alcohol, tracking alcohol, making their money off the alcohol. So it's less likely that something that's not on a receipt that the establishment didn't charge for is unlikely that it's there. And in fact, if it actually was there, it would raise my blood alcohol concentration estimate.
You told Mr. Day that you testified once before in California, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was a homicide case, right?
Yes,
And the result was the person was convicted, right?
that's correct.
Now, earlier you testified that the stimulant, the energy drink, allows the person to feel that they are less impaired.
Yes, that's correct.
However, you later testified that they seem to be able to balance, and they seem to act more like they are in a sober state. As a matter of fact, whenever I mentioned the testimony of Marvin Zamora, you referred to that as he had said that he saw the defendant, and you said that the combination of the energy drink and the alcohol can make someone appear as if they are sober. Is that right?
Okay, I'm not following what your question is.
I'm just asking you if that's what you said.
Why don't you repeat what you think she said so she can confirm?
You said, Doctor, that when a person consumes alcoholic beverage combined with an energy drink, it seems to improve their ability to balance.
Right.
They appear like they are in a more sober state.
Right. But their brain is impaired in ability to think clearly, generate answers to questions. So that was actually the basis. The inability to judge impairment was the basis of the United States Food and Drug Administration, based on my study, to not allow pre-mixed energy drink alcohol products in the market, because they judged that as being unsafe.
Now, your degrees are in what fields?
Psychology.
Psychology. Not in chemistry.
No.
Not in organic chemistry.
No, I had 5 to 6 years of postdoctoral training in drug research. That's common for drug researchers.
But not chemistry.
No, I've had chemistry courses, of course.
Now, you had told Mr. Day that a person can perform as trained if they have consumed alcohol and an energy drink.
I don't think I said they can perform as trained. That was not my testimony.
Okay. Then let me rephrase the question. If a person is trained to take some type of an action, and their motor skills are not depleted or diminished because of the ingestion of an energy drink, but according to your testimony, their cognitive ability is somehow affected, they can still perform those motor functions, right?
Yes.
So if you have a SWAT-trained officer who is using a firearm, he's still going to be able to pull the trigger, right?
Well, I don't test SWAT officers, so I wouldn't want to testify about police officers.
Then why are you testifying here today?
I think you wanted to know what a blood alcohol concentration is.
So if you have a person of the defendant's age, a generic person of the defendant's age,
Right.
and they know how to use a firearm, and they have consumed an energy drink and alcohol, they are able to operate the trigger. Is that correct?
I think most people are aware of the fact that just because people are drinking doesn't mean that they can't pull a trigger. Probably the majority of, firearm crimes in the United States are alcohol related.
Now, you mentioned that this is an extremely high level, this 0.24 that you estimated.
Yes.
And you have a range on that estimation. It goes down to 0.21 and up to 0.27.
Right.
And would it surprise you to know that there are people who operate motor vehicles without crashing into anything with BACs that are as high as 0.39?
That's extremely unusual.
Would it surprise you?
It has occurred in rare cases, and when it does happen, it's so unusual that it usually makes major news reports because it is so unusual.
Okay. And would you also agree with me that there are people who can be at the lower limit, the 0.21 that you described, and still be operating a motor vehicle.
Yes.
And operating a motor vehicle requires the lower brain and the upper brain, doesn't it?
Well, you can operate a motor vehicle effectively, or you can operate a motor vehicle poorly.
We're presuming that the person is pulled over by an officer not after crashing into something. They're operating a motor vehicle effectively.
Well, if an officer pulled them over, then they're not usually driving the vehicle effectively.
Let me narrow my question. What I'm talking about is whether or not a person can steer a motor vehicle without crashing into something. With me so far?
Yes, they could probably steer.
Okay. And they can operate the controls of that motor vehicle, right?
When you have dual task performance where you're manipulating more than one thing at a time, I would say at that BAC level, even at 0.21, that would be incredibly difficult to do that effectively.
But it happens quite often, right?
What do you mean by quite often?
People are stopped and charged with alcohol-related driving offenses fairly often. It's
Yes.
okay. Now, as directing your attention back to the use of the firearm, you had heard Mr. Trumpeter talk about this response, this perception and response, and the timing of that. Is that right?
I did hear his testimony, yes.
And you also heard him testify that officers are trained to not activate, pull the trigger on their weapon when there is no perceived threat. Is that right?
I heard his testimony, but that is not my area of expertise.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
In order to stop pulling the trigger, a person has to make a decision and they have to use a muscle, right? They have to do that in order to pull the trigger and then decide not to. Am I correct so far?
It has to be a yes or no.
Oh, so my apologies.
So the last response was a yes.
Yes.
So there were 4 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, right?
I think that this is beyond my area of expertise. I don't do gun-related research. I do alcohol research.
So you don't have anything to provide, any information to provide this jury on the defendant's ability to make a decision to fire the weapon or not fire the weapon?
I do not do research on guns.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
One last question, Doctor. You did not interview the defendant. You have no information about his medical history. Are you familiar with the term functional alcoholic?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar, would it be accurate to say that there are people who may have different tolerance levels for alcohol?
Yes.
And those different tolerance levels of alcohol may permit a person to perform at a different level than someone else who has never consumed alcohol, but then they find themselves one day having consumed a drink.
Performance is domain specific.
What does domain specific mean?
So certain things, if someone is a functional alcoholic, they can do things relatively intact and then other things not. So I'll use an example like a certain
Doctor, my question was whether or not he was robbed of his ability to decide. And my meaning in that is, in your opinion, whether or not he was robbed of his ability to decide in the more significant areas of life.
He has to stick to the question he's asked.
Okay, I'm not clear if you're reading or if you're asking a question based on a prior response in terms of if she remembers the question that you asked then.
I'm getting to that, Your Honor. I have...
So why don't you just ask the question, Mr. Byers, if she recalls making a statement?
I will. Doctor, on the pretrial interview that we did with you, you said, I think that his level of intoxication, combined with the knowledge that we have that intoxication is not changed by energy drink administration for cognitive processes, his cognitive processes would be expected to be at that level based on that blood/alcohol concentration. So there's a pretty good literature that would suggest that if your blood/alcohol concentration is 3 times the legal limit, you would expect that person is not functioning with a high level of decision making because they're grossly intoxicated at that point. That was your response to my question to you of whether or not he was robbed of his ability to decide. Do you remember that?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does the jury have any questions of this witness? Should I anticipate any other questions from the jury? All right, let me ask the attorneys for the question. Kaczynski, the jury has some questions of you. Because of the stimulants in energy drinks, are amounts monitored, and this is, of course, if you're able to respond, are amounts monitored by bartenders when mixed with alcohol as it relates to potential intoxication?
That's an excellent question. In fact, the energy drink manufacturers have placed on their cans, do not mix with alcohol, and they stand by that stance. Most bartenders in most states, and I'm not sure if this is true in New Mexico, but most bartenders in most states like to serve energy drinks and alcohol separately so they do not get in trouble with the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. They don't get in trouble with the energy drink manufacturers who are concerned about litigation. And so in most states, you have to ask for the Red Bull separately from the alcohol and you have to mix it yourself. So I was actually surprised to see on some of these receipts, this person purchased a Jaeger bomb, because in a lot of states you would have to purchase the Jaeger shot separately from the Red Bull and then ask for a glass and do the shot yourself. But I don't know if that's true here.
Okay, so I believe the question is more along the lines, as bartenders monitor the number of drinks, do they take into consideration the mixing of energy drinks with the alcohol?
My understanding is that bartenders are not responsible. If a patron wants to consume as many energy drinks as they want, they can.
Does adrenaline have anything to do or any substantive impact related to reacting to alcohol consumption?
Alcohol is a sedative drug, so it tends to calm the brain down and calm the body down. I guess, is the question pertaining to how the energy drink comes into play? Just with alcohol?
Natural adrenaline, how does that overcome, or how is it affected by the consumption of alcohol?
Well, I don't really do research on adrenaline, so what I do know is that alcohol is a sedative drug and it calms you. So it should lower adrenaline, and the sedation should calm you down.
I think the question is asked, and again, if you're able to answer, in an event where someone has been drinking or drinking heavily, if they have a high consumption of alcohol that evening, if there is an event that normally would cause a degree of adrenaline, how does that impact the normal impairment associated with heavy drinking?
Well, if you think about an ordinary situation, like for example, you're very stressed because you have to do something really difficult and you have that adrenaline feeling, and alcohol would calm that adrenaline. So it's typical for people with a lot of anxiety about something and they feel butterflies in their stomach from adrenaline. If they have a glass of alcohol of any kind, it would probably calm them a little bit.
So let me just take it a step forward, a step beyond what I've asked you, because I think that this is really the intent. Let me give you a hypothetical. If someone had been drinking as heavily as what is suggested in this matter, if a fire alarm had gone off, would the natural adrenaline that would be caused by a sense of urgency or emergency, would it have given them the ability to overcome the limitations or impairments from intoxication, if you're able to respond?
Right, so if you have some sort of threatening situation, that's a lower level brain function. And so if the alcohol has not affected those lower level areas all that much, if the dose of alcohol is, not affecting those areas, you should be able to react to that threat. Whether that reaction is diminished a little bit, I really can't say.
Does the jury have any additional questions of this witness? Let's see, Mr. Day and Mr. Byers, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Marchinsky, thank you very much for your testimony today. You have no further responsibilities to these proceedings, so have a very safe hearing.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, so that completes the testimony for today. Release the jury. Wish you a good evening and ask you to be here at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Please rise for the